And we are live. Hey, you guys, come on in. We're excited to join you tonight. Hey, Miriam.
Hi, how are
Hi, so
you?
excited. I'm awesome. Thank you. So excited to have you as our guest tonight. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to kind of pop in. So please make sure you come in, that you share with anybody that needs to watch it. I know some people are anticipating your visit with us today. So I'm excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. So I'm going to just give about 30 seconds before we get started.
Okay.
And then you can hit it. Come on in here. And when you come in, let us know where you are tuning in from so that we can say hey. And if you're on Facebook, hey, we are going to be on Instagram right after this. So if you need a double dose of us, you can meet us over there.
It's going to be a long night.
It is going to be a long night. Miriam is here with us tonight. So please take a second. My name is Lisa Alexander. I'm the executive director here at Stand Up Survivor, and I'm excited that you joined me for a live. We have, hey, from LA. We're excited to have attorney Miriam here with us from Manteghi Law, and she's going to share some jewels about legal coaching and just her journey as a survivor, and she wants to empower you. So make sure that you jump in, say hey, and we're going to get started. Miriam, please tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I've really been looking forward to this. So you know, what I do is I'm a family lawyer. I really only assist and represent women who are leaving abusive relationships or have left abusive relationships. And that's kind of been my journey since I left my own abusive relationship. And so that's the bulk of what I do. What I also am transforming my law firm into becoming is a resource for women who are in abusive relationships and leaving them, so that they can empower themselves with the knowledge they need, the information they need to make good decisions, and to basically be able to um, set themselves up for success in the legal world and in the outer world, right? Because it's not just we're not it's not compartmentalized, right? Like,
Can
but
I just say how excited I am that you have focused on women and empowering them in the legal system? I know that looking back on my life now, I'm like, man, I should have been an attorney for women in domestic abuse situations because we need it. It's such a needed field, it's such a needed area, and there's so much lack in that area. For lack of a better term, so much ignorance in the field. In the legal aspect. So I'm excited that you dedicated your time. Hey from Hotlanta. It's hot everywhere, but hey from Hotlanta. Okay, so when you come in, let us know where you're tuning in from so we can say hello to you. So you're telling us how you've chosen to dedicate your life to focusing on women who have experienced abuse. So I know that you share that you're a survivor. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
So, I mean, I was in an abusive marriage until 2019 for 7 years. During that time, interestingly enough, I was also a family lawyer, and I did serve women intermittently. I had cases where domestic abuse was part of the proceeding, and I really never made that connection. You know, here I was in that kind of marriage, and I never really made the connection that, oh well, actually, you know, this is something that we have in common, me and this client. I really was so disconnected from myself. And so it took the pandemic, it took leaving my relationship, leaving my firm, and then entering the pandemic as a lawyer with her own firm to really give me to trigger a lot of epiphanies for me, right? One of which was really that uh, domestic violence is not a niche, right? So before, when I was in my firm, you know, we thought of it as family lawyers, that's a niche, right? Like, we had family law, we had our cases, and then out here somewhere out on the side, we have domestic violence cases. What the pandemic taught us all, I believe, and those of us who really wanted to listen, was that domestic violence was not an exception, it's a norm. And so the statistics are that, and these are just, I think the statistics are much higher, but in Canada, that 44% of women are abused in their intimate relationships.
That's huge.
Yeah, and that this number actually increased by 30% during the pandemic.
I was going to say real quick, it's interesting because I like people to understand that survivors of domestic violence are in all walks of life. Here you are, practicing attorney, you're working with clients who are domestic violence, and you're still not connecting this is me. And so I want people to recognize this, even as survivors and people who are outside looking in, just because, number one, because you're in it, you don't necessarily realize you're in it. But number two, there are people in all walks of life who are experiencing domestic violence. And so people, and I'm sure that you've seen this, people think, well, they just don't have money, or they're in the lower class, or they're not educated. And that's just not a true statement. We work with survivors from all different walks of life. And you're an example of a survivor, an attorney who has experienced domestic violence.
Yeah. And I think I think domestic violence and family violence is really the one phenomenon that knows no lines. It doesn't matter doesn't matter what color you are, what ethnic group you are, what language you speak. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, what car you drive. It just doesn't matter. And I don't think there's a phenomenon that's so pervasive, right? And that's why, during the pandemic, it was this, domestic violence was a pandemic before COVID ever was, right? Absolutely. And so that's something I think that is really important for everybody to understand, is that domestic violence is the norm. And I'm going to say something, people might not like it, but you're really either, the world is kind of divided into, you're either a perpetrator or you're a victim. And that line is not always, that line is fluid sometimes, right?
Because what do you mean by that?
Well, we know that perpetrators were once victims, right?
Some of them.
For a lot of them, perpetrators, they saw that somewhere.
Absolutely. Right? They learned it somewhere, yes.
Right. And that's just not any, and we live in a very violent world, right? We live in a world where violence, where might is right, where aggression is the norm, right? And it's always been that way. And I think that, for me, when I think about violence, and when I think about aggression, and when I think about subjugation, and specifically as it relates to women, I think about it as, before we had like Indigenous people and white people meet, before we had Black people and white people meet, that power differential, that subjugation was always in place between men and women, right? And that's where it came from. And that's where, colonialism brought it and put it, and that's where slavery came from. And that's where the genocide of Indigenous people came from. It's that power differential, that subjugation that was always there, as far as men and women were concerned.
Yeah. And it has been from the beginning of time. There's always been a power difference. So right. when you realize that you were an attorney, but in an abusive relationship, and you've been practicing law, working with these women, and realizing this is not a separate group of people, when did you decide that you wanted to focus on that?
So I think one of my first cases in the pandemic was a woman who, and I think this is the case that where I realized, oh wait, she's me. She was me. I was her. This is the same as what happened to me. It was kind of my awakening case. And then it just was, I was inundated, case after case after case. And then once I started speaking out about it a little bit, friends of mine, colleagues of mine from law school, people that I had no idea, people who were living lives that I was thinking were, it never occurred to me, right? Calling me for help. What should I do? Lawyers, people who you would think that they would stand up for themselves, and not to say that they hadn't stood up for themselves, but in the sense that, people you wouldn't necessarily think were in abusive relationships, right? They didn't have a financial need to be in one. They didn't have those things that we typically think
Right,
are the, are keeping us in those relationships, right? And so then, I think that's where it becomes really important to rethink what keeps women in those relationships, right? It's tangible things and intangible things,
right.
right?
Absolutely, highly emotional reasons that they stay. So tell me the difference between, well, tell me a little bit about the family law aspect versus the legal coaching aspect, because I know that you said you're leaning toward the legal coaching aspect. So tell me the difference between the two.
So representing somebody in family law is basically, the norm, right? Where somebody comes to you, you represent them, you're on the record for them, you're their attorney, and if you're at a firm, you have billable hours to meet, right?
Right.
So
Sounds very expensive.
yeah, so really, I mean, we ideally would like to think that the attorneys are there to serve their clients. But unfortunately, realistically, the attorney is there to bill a certain number of billable hours. And that
Well,
means
that's pretty terrible.
it,
That's
it,
it's pretty
right.
terrible.
It's what it's called in this community, a repugnant market, right? And to me, it's really no different than war profiteering, right? You're profiteering off of somebody's misery.
Yeah, somebody's pain. And the thing about being a survivor of domestic violence, you're coming out in this cloud, right? And so all you're doing is like you're grappling for some type of help from somewhere, from someone. And so of course you think, well, I need an attorney because maybe the abuser has more money or the abuser has a job and more power and you've been a stay-at-home, parent. And so you're grappling for someone to help it make sense. So what do people tell you? Get an attorney, right? But then it's so expensive to afford an attorney. We hear that all the time.
The first thing I would tell somebody is to get a therapist. And the reason I say that is because
I'm not going to argue that one. It's true.
well, the reason I say that is because a lot of people come to me and they're bleeding emotion, right? And I understand that because that was me. I was also bleeding emotion. When you're in that stage of bleeding emotion, you don't make good calls. You've probably your level of empathy is probably at zero because you're in such a high survival mode, right? So you're that in that state, you should not be going into litigation. I mean, sometimes you have to, and that's a reality. But when women come to me, I can tell they're in that state, right? And I tell them, you're not for litigation. You're not ready.
And why do you say that? I mean, I can kind of guess because I was in heightened state when I went in front of the judge and I was a hot mess, hysterical, tears, snot everywhere, and I just looked crazy, literally, to the judge. And so why do you say that they shouldn't go in front of the judge in that heightened state of emotion?
I just don't think they should enter into litigation in that state of emotion because they don't make good calls. And what you have to understand about an attorney is not your therapist. An attorney is someone you instruct. So I give you advice, absolutely. And I empower you as well, absolutely. But you have to be able to instruct me, right? Because then we have a problem. If you can't instruct me, if I tell you, listen, these are our choices. If you make this choice, this is what's going to happen. If you make this choice, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You have to still make that decision. And if you're in that state of your nervous system is completely out of whack, you're just not right with yourself, right? You're not going to be able to instruct me properly. I can't be your therapist.
That's so good. The way you broke that down just now, you're like, there's a difference. And it kind of reminded me of like a black and white, non-emotional, like your attorney is not there to be emotional with you. That's just a fact. They're not there to be your therapist.
And they shouldn't.
And they shouldn't be. But as survivors, we're going into like, oh my gosh, they did this, they did that. And the attorney, the judge is looking at facts, not emotions. But we're going in there with our emotions. So I think that actually is really great advice. And I hope that whoever's listening and is going to watch the replay, but they really take that into consideration. because your attorney is not your therapist. Because what we're doing is we're asking our attorney to feel our emotion and therefore make a decision. But that's not the way that it works.
And you know, I've in my experience, when I have been too enmeshed emotionally with a client, there's always been a poor result, right? I've always had a poor result. And so for me, that's something that I am very cautious of. It's a boundary that I really hold because I want my client to have a good result, right? So I will say no, I'm not going to represent you. You're not there yet. You need a therapist. I can help you strategize so you don't make mistakes while you're in this state, but we're not going to court.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good, Miriam, because I think that as a survivor, we're at the height when we're coming out, everything is swirling: child custody, child support, children, the house, the car, homelessness. So much is going on, and we're not able to function and make, because the attorney and the judge is looking at this or this, like you said. They're not thinking, "How are you feeling today?" And we go in court with our feelings and our emotions and our tears, not being able to effectively communicate. And another thing you said was, we're there to instruct the attorney and direct them as to, and I don't think I've ever heard it like that before, not knowing that we actually we're paying the attorney to do something for us, right? And I think that was a really good way that you put that. And I really hope that people are listening to that, because you do have the authority to kind of tell your attorney which way you'd like. They're waiting for you to tell them what to do.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things that I really want to point out is that this concept of community, right? And I think that people who come to me and they expect me to be their therapist, right? One of the things I say to them is that you have to cultivate your community. Who's your community? And if I speak to people, which I do, I speak to people who are like, listen, I want to leave, but you know, I haven't pulled the trigger yet. I want to speak to an attorney so that I can set it up for myself in the best way possible. And especially if there are children involved,
Yes.
I always tell them you need to set up your community, right?
That's
because good. Where his leverage is his money, generally speaking, and his position possibly, and his entitlement in society, right? Which is the ultimate leverage, awesome. Right? Ultimate leverage. And the fact that the institutions were really created to serve him. But your leverage is your community. And that's something that should not be, taken lightly, right? Community is so important. So, you know, if I have a client who wants to come and cry with me, I tell them, you know, you need to go talk to your mom, go talk to your sister, go talk to your friends, right? Go talk to those people, and come back to me when you understand my role, right?
That's good.
What becomes really difficult, Lisa, is I feel that a lot of people around the victim of abuse are not trauma informed.
Of course.
Yeah. So this is a place where I'd really like to say that. Like, if your friend is coming to you, if your sister is coming to you, if your daughter is coming to you, if your employee is coming to you and you realize that they are in an abusive situation, an abusive marriage, then you really have to, you know, as you have to count yourself as part of their community, right? Because I guarantee you, everybody in this world has either been a victim of domestic abuse because they were a victim, or they watched domestic abuse happen.
So, I mean, statistically, that's true. Statistically. And if you guys have any questions or comments, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We can see them over on the side. I'm really glad you said that. I just want to piggyback on that one more time. And I want to say, I love how you said when a client comes to you and they want to cry, and you're like, these are billable. I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, these are billable hours. You do not want to spend your time crying with me. Cry with your therapist, your mom, your aunt, your cousin, and come to me with a plan. And so let me ask you a question. If I'm a client and I'm wanting to advice from my attorney, like, I want you to give me advice. What do I do? How do I win this case? What do I do? Is that therefore your role?
My role is to give you legal advice based on your particular situation and what you're looking to get, right? That's technically in kind of a little box my role, right? My role, like, so that's the role of an attorney with a client in general, right? Me personally, in the kind of legal system that I would like to be a part of and that I foresee in the future in a just world, um, my role is something different. I think I lost you, Lisa. Um,
We're back. Can you hear me?
Sorry.
You know, okay, good. Awesome.
Yeah. So my role personally is to inform you, educate you, empower you, and to see you, make sure that you understand what you're dealing with. I think
And this is
people,
the legal aspect. This is as an attorney, correct?
yeah, this is as an attorney
Okay.
in my definition of what I believe I should be doing,
Okay.
right?
Got it.
'Cause mine is a little bit wider than what maybe a non-trauma informed lawyer would do, right?
Perfect. Yes.
But for me, it's very important that you understand your place in the context of the macro universe that you live in, right? So you're not just a woman who's a survivor of an abusive relationship and you're trying to get a win next week, right? That's not something that I see. I mean, that is my short-term goal, definitely, but I have to be there and tell you and have you understand that when you're in an abusive relationship and you're trying to leave it, that power differential that you have in your family is the same power differential that's simply going to be compounded when you go to court, because these are institutions that are built on that power differential, right? So you're going to be fighting an uphill battle, and my job is to let you know that, and that this is not like we're not here for this is a long game, right? This is a long game. And so, clients will come to me and they'll have an initial, their ex will have had like an initial victory, right? Their ex will have been the first to file, which is something I always talk about on my page. And I say, you should, it's advantageous to be the first to file. So don't, once you know that you're leaving and that it's an abusive relationship, you need to be the first to file, right? This isn't, I do have to make that disclaimer that it's not legal advice, but it is strategic advice insofar as when you're the first to file, you frame the narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
When he's the first to file, he frames the narrative. His narrative is generally false. That's just the dynamic of an abusive relationship. So he will have some early wins because he's been able to frame that narrative. And that may be very discouraging to my client, right? But what I always believe and what I tell my client is that it's only the truth that can stand the test of time, right? And litigation is a long game, right? It's unfortunately, family litigation is one of the longest kind of prolonged and protracted types of litigation that there is. So at some point, as you know, in life, a liar is gonna forget his lies, right? At some point, a liar's lies are gonna play tricks on him, right? But if you're standing in your truth from the very beginning, even if he has some initial victories, because you're standing in your truth and you're standing in your truth the whole way through, that truth is going to stand the test of time. And so you have to be willing and able to live with some serious discouragements and failures that we call failures early on in the proceeding. Just because
that's really hard. I mean, that's really hard to tell a survivor, though. To be, that's like, I can understand how. Hey, Tanya, I see you. We're going to ask your question in a minute. Thank you for that. That's really hard. We've come out of a losing situation, and so you're telling me, hey, just so you know, you may continue to lose at least for this season. That's hard, and it's intimidating, and oftentimes why survivors don't want to move forward with it. That's just. I just want to say that it's kind of a hard pill to swallow. Appreciate the honesty, but it's hard. And one thing I also that I'm learning from what you're talking about is that the litigation process is long. I understand family law is long, but for a survivor of domestic violence, and I mean, I know survivors 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years. This has been going on, and it's ridiculous because all you want to do is begin the healing and move on, and that's really hard to be going through a process for so long. So when we talk about this is not legal advice, but how expensive can this really get? When we're looking at a long-term, like a longer litigation when it comes to a survivor trying to get justice.
So I know somebody, not my client. I know someone who's already spent $400,000 in family litigation, and they've had very little success.
And there's got to be something better than that. That is just ridiculous.
Yeah. And that to me is just, I just don't know how any industry thinks that that's okay. I just don't understand how any industry can look at itself, any profession can look at themselves and think, okay, we've just impoverished this mother and her child,
Yeah.
right? We've gotten very little, to show for I mean, $400,000. It's a house. It's two houses.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And just rolling right along to the next client, right? And I think that that's where we've really lost ourselves in this profession, because at the end of the day, this is the profession. Like this to me is a noble profession, right? This is the profession of Nelson Mandela, right? This is in Iran. All lawyers who are working for human rights are all in jail. So this is a profession that I really respect.
Okay.
And to see myself, to have seen myself kind of drowning in this kind of world where I didn't really see how I could do it differently.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't see that until the pandemic happened and until everything shifted.
I think that's just really hard for a survivor who's just really trying to get their life back and figure it out. But that's why I'm so thankful for your honesty during this session and just sharing this, because the problem with survivors, we're not knowledgeable. We're not educated on the legal field at all. That's just not our forte, And so we're coming out of here as survivors just trying to figure it out. We just want custody of our kids. We're bruised up. We've got injuries. We've lost everything. We may be in a shelter or whatever. And all we're trying to do is, keep our children from being with the abuser because they're abusive, or trying to get child support to purchase diapers, the basics of everything. Yet the legal system does not make that easy for us. Honestly, it sounds terrible telling a survivor this is what they need. So I want to just throw in Tanya's question real quick. So what does an attorney, hey, you guys, thanks for popping in. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. What does an attorney need from a DV survivor to best help them in court? Which is a really, really great question, because I was wondering the same thing. Thanks, Tanya.
Okay. So what I think an attorney needs, and what I tell my clients who are ready to litigate, right? Who are in a position where I feel like they can instruct me. It doesn't mean you're healed and you're great and no, it just means that you're in a position where you don't expect me to be your therapist. You have resources around you. You have community around you that is assisting you in all of the ways that I can't, right? And what I always tell my clients is write your story, right? Write your story, write the story, tell, specific times, dates, when, who was there, write your story. Right. And I always tell my clients beforehand too. I mean, I give this advice, or strategic advice, on my page, where I say, keep a journal and write your story, so that you have your truth backbone there, right? And then you come to your lawyer. Don't come to your lawyer and say, I was abused. Don't come to your lawyer and say, oh, he's psycho, he's a narcissist. Okay? Don't say that, because, I mean, their lawyers and judges are instantly repelled by those words.
Okay.
Right? And you need to say what happened. Describe the events.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Show, don't tell. Right? So describe everything let the lawyer say, "Oh my God, that's financial abuse."
Okay.
Let the lawyer draw the conclusion. You just tell the story,
Okay.
right? Tell the story of how, immigration abuse. Tell the story of how he would tell you that, he's going to he's going to retract. So in Canada, we have an application, a sponsorship, spousal sponsorship, how he's going to call Canada Immigration and retract the spousal sponsorship whenever you refuse to have sex with him, or if you refuse to do things that he didn't want to do, or tell the story and let the decision maker or the attorney, let them decide what that is.
But I have a question for you,
Yes.
which is excellent. Sorry. So I love that. And I'm with you, Tanya. Boom. Like, tell the story. I got that. And you said let the attorney say that's financial abuse. But what if you're dealing with an attorney who doesn't know what abuse, like doesn't know it? All they know is physical abuse.
Right. So that's a tough question because there are attorneys who are trauma informed, and that's an attorney who's trauma informed would know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have attorneys who are not. Now, I think a lot of attorneys, you have to understand, like, attorneys and judges are part of the population. It's not like, when we cite statistics, it's not like those statistics don't include attorneys and don't include judges, right? So, I was a statistic while I was being a lawyer, sorry. So so it's not that they don't have experience with financial abuse. It's not that they're in their families, it's not happening. It's not that in their childhood they didn't have experience with abuse. It's just that they haven't made that connection, right? They haven't made that connection. And so when you go to an attorney, most probably they will have known of a perpetrator of financial abuse, or they would have been a perpetrator of financial abuse, or they are the victim of financial abuse. But when you tell your story, that's a way to wake them up, to say, "Oh, okay, that's something is off there," versus you saying, "Oh, I was financially abused." And I mean, definitely going to a trauma informed lawyer is definitely obviously what you want to be doing. But at this point, I really think we should all be trauma informed.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, let's scream that from the rooftops. Absolutely agree. And that leads me to the next question. First of all, I love when you said, tell your story, tell the story, write the story down, and describe the events, right? And I think that, okay, I'll rehash it in a second, but I love how we're able to clearly, as survivors, articulate what we've been through if we move the emotions from it for a minute, because we're able to really articulate without the emotional part. And that's where, if you're just joining us, Miriam talks about getting a therapist, because your attorney is not your therapist. I know that's hard to chalk up. I know you want to go in their office crying, but it is not beneficial for your case. Okay. So someone asking the question, are judges waking up? Are they beginning to see what's going on? There's so much research from experts. Is there a shift coming, or do they have, I know this is long. Can you see it? Do we have to pick from the lesser of two evils? Are the judges and attorneys acknowledging, what's going on in the domestic violence world, the need for the help for trauma-informed attorneys and judges?
So in Canada, we have a bill that is almost passed, called Kira's Law, and I yeah, so you know about it, and it's named after a little girl who was killed, because a judge allowed unsupervised custody. Unsupervised access, unsupervised visitation, with a man who was quite clearly should not have had supervised access. And so there's a bill that is almost passed. So it's at the level of the Senate right now. So where it will require and it will mandate judges to get to become trauma informed by having training in domestic violence and coercive control.
All right.
We don't really know what that training will look like right now. We don't really know who's going to provide that training.
Okay.
My take on, I mean, I think that's absolutely necessary. It absolutely should have happened a long time ago.
Yes.
And it's horrific that a little girl had to die for that to happen. But what I think is that to me, if you're a litigant before a judge, then you have a certain amount of power to educate that judge in a subtle way.
Okay.
And I think that historically judges have been very, the issues of domestic abuse have not been well, have not been well received in court. And in fact, as you know, many attorneys have always told their clients, don't bring up domestic abuse. It's going to really ruin your case, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens is that, what happens in cases like that, though, is that, so then everything goes really badly, right? Because void of the truth, the proceeding is going to be somehow warped and twisted and perverted, right?
Yes.
Because the truth is really very important, right? The truth is very key. And so then if you bring up, in the middle of the proceeding, if you suddenly want to turn around and say, well, actually, I didn't bring it up in the beginning, but I want to bring it up now, then it's even worse, right?
I hope you guys heard that. If you heard that, just saying, I want to highlight that.
Right. And I think if an attorney tells you, let's not talk about the abuse because it's going to harm your case, that's not the attorney for you.
Okay, time out. I want to pause it. Can you repeat that? Because I mean, I hear it all the time from survivors all the time that they say, they told me not to bring it up in court. Well, that's the entire reason you're leaving the marriage or the relationship.
Yeah. If an attorney tells you that not to bring up domestic violence because it's going to harm you in court, that attorney is not for you.
Great. Absolutely.
And I'm going to tell you why I'm saying that.
Please.
Because I think it's important to understand that. Because you have to, you're going to court and you're the underdog. Right? You really are. You are the subject, you're the oppressed, right? That system is there to oppress you. So you're going to bring your case to a system that is already there to harm you.
Wow.
Right? So in order for you to have an impact, right, you have to think of when you can have an impact, right? You may not have an impact today. You may not have an impact next week, right? You may not even have an impact next year. But there's two things that happen when you bring the truth to the table, right? First of all, your kids see that, right?
Good, yeah.
Your kids see that, and that is the example that you're setting for them. And you may have a horrible custody order. You may have a horrible access order. You may have lost your children. And I hate to say this, but I know that there are people who, they've lost their children completely unjustly because a judge has just made that choice, right? You may be Kira's mom, right? But the reality is that the reason that you have these children is so you can raise them to be impactful members of society and do their part in creating an ever advancing civilization. And by you always telling the truth and always standing in your truth, you are doing your part to set an example for your children. And you set an example for me as your lawyer. You set an example for a judge that reads your material and says, wow, because judges aren't stupid. They know lawyers tell their clients don't talk about domestic violence, right? So you may not touch one judge, but there's 10 judges that might just not even care, but there's one judge who will, right? And we can't think of ourselves as, we can't have blinders on and think, okay, this is my case. and this is my proceeding. I need to win next week. These are my kids, and this is me, just me, right? We really have to sit back and understand we're not asking for our rights. We're asking for a transformation of the institutions of society to serve us and to be just.
Yes. We're not asking for much. Yeah. Be fair. Be just. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we're asking for. I'm not asking for the same rights that a man has, because that means that someone else has to not have rights. That's the framework of the rights framework we have right now, is some people have them and some people don't, right? That's kind of the capitalistic view of rights. That's not what I want,
Yeah.
right? So we really need to understand that we have an impact. We have power. We have the ability to touch the people around us and the people who work with us. And we are an example. As long as we're in our truth, we're an example.
I love that. Write your story. Tell your truth. Don't be afraid. If the attorney tells you, Tanya put in quitation bar. If the attorney tells you not to bring up DV because it's going to harm you in court, that is not the attorney for you. So we have a few more minutes. I wanted to touch on what you're doing now is legal coaching, right? And so you kind of stepped away from the whole everything that you just talked to us, because honestly, it just sounds horrible in a way, but because it just doesn't sound super effective for a survivor who needs justice, for a survivor who wants to be heard, who wants to keep custody of their children, who deserves justice. So now tell me about legal coaching. What is legal coaching? And how is it different?
So I want to point out that I'm an attorney in Ontario, Canada, and I'm not sure. I know that in the United States there are there are self-represented litigants. I think they're called pro se. Is it pro se or anyway? Someone can maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But so what legal coaching is someone who is self-represented continues to represent themselves, or starts to, but they represent themselves, but they have a lawyer behind the scenes who assists them with drafting the documentation and preparing them for court. Okay. And so the fees definitely are much less, okay, because we're collaborators in a way, right? I have a legal coaching client who is such an inspiration to me. She's so incredibly intelligent. She's really coming from such a place of truth, and I'm inspired by her every day. And we were able to get a really good result together because of that, right? So this is a way for you to be your own advocate, and which I believe is really, no one can advocate for you like you can.
So I agree. Absolutely.
Right? No one can advocate for you like you can. And a lawyer will simply pour into you their knowledge and their expertise and assist you with drafting everything. And in fact, I'm gonna say this. In fact, go for it. As I get disbarred, but no, I can do a lot more in the documentation that the judge sees when my name is not there.
Yeah.
Right. Because just as people in women in abusive relationships are in a power differential and an abusive relationship with their partner, because of the nature of the institutions of justice that we have today, we're also in an abusive relationship in a way, in some kind of a narcissistic a relationship with those that hold the power in those institutions, right? So a lot of times, we're scared to say anything. We're scared to criticize what a judge has said or what a judge has done. Or we're scared to say, wait, this wasn't right. But a member of the public isn't. They have nothing to lose. We're scared of being, blacklisted, and that judge never ruling in our favor ever again, and our clients harming our clients' chances in the future. Like, we have all kinds of things that we're thinking about as lawyers, right? Or, this judge will never see me the same again. This judge will hate me, and they can be fickle, right? Judges make decisions all the time where you're like,
Yeah.
right? And we don't want to be that. We want a sense of predictability when we go to court, when we can tell our client, listen, this judge is like this, and this judge will most likely rule like this. But if that judge sees you as some kind of threat, or someone who's like, not in line, but when you go to court as a member of the public, that you are there, and those institutions are there to serve you. The judges are civil servants. They're there to serve you, right? And if you can say whatever you want in your materials, right? You can point out things that I would not be able to point out if my name was on the documentation.
But as a legal coach, you can't help us fill out that paperwork.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I remember wanting to get divorced. So I have 2 children. I don't know what to do. And I go to the courthouse and the divorce packet's, this thick. It's huge. I had no idea where to begin. And oftentimes that's what survivors are dealing with. And so to know that legal coaching is not going to cost me $400,000, it can be something that's affordable for the survivor. I think that makes such a significant difference.
And it's empowering.
I was just going to say that. Yep. And it empowers the survivor.
Right.
You said something when you talked the other day, and I don't even have it in front of me, but you talked about the empowerment aspects for the survivor in legal coaching.
Yeah. I think when you are, the empowerment aspect is very important, because when you're empowered, you can lead, right? And to me, the whole point of being a survivor is to lead. Mm-hmm. Because what's the point of surviving something if you now cannot lead those who are coming up and surviving the same thing that you did, right? That you survived. Mm-hmm. Before I was a survivor of domestic abuse, I was a survivor of breast cancer. And I always used to hate that word, survivor. I always felt like it made me look like I felt like all raggedy and kind of like disheveled. I was like the survivor, kind of like coming in from the the rain, all like, and I really had to sit down with myself and really decide what I wanted to be, right? And as a survivor of breast cancer, for me, it was really important to make sure that the lessons that I learned were lessons that I could impart to other women who are going through that. And so I wrote a book about my experiences, right? So I think that the whole point of being a survivor, right, is you're called to lead.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's the only way to make sense of it.
And you said earlier too, the manifestation of who you become as a survivor happens in that aspect, because we walk in not thinking that we can do it. But working with someone like yourself as a legal coach gives us the empowerment, encouragement to know that we can do it, because, like you said earlier, no one can tell our story like us, right? Yeah. And so before we let Miriam go, I want to kind of go over really quickly some of the things that she said, and we're going over to Instagram at 9:00. So if you need some more, head over there. One thing she said is that, and I love this because this might be my favorite line from tonight, is that your attorney is not your therapist. You going in their office crying and emotional, and trust me, that was me. I was in front of the judge, a hot mess, right? Not realizing that he literally, his reaction was like, so what do you want me to do? Like literally. And I'm just like, I'm appalled, but not realizing that my emotions needed to be checked with my therapist, with my community. And then I'm able to instruct the attorney to what I need them to do. And so understanding the difference between that. You talked about building a community, which is really important. Friends, family, therapists, who is your community? Your attorney works for you, right? They're not part of your emotional, okay. What else? Write your story, and no one can tell your story like you. You tell your story and write it down. Like you said, tell your attorney your story so that they know how to help you. That's some of the stuff I took away.
No, that's good. That's and I know there were questions. I know there were other questions. Yes. We didn't get to them, and I don't want anyone to think that, oh, I didn't, because I put in my stories I'm going to discuss certain things which I didn't get to, but I will discuss them on my page later on. I mean, this is not the last. Hopefully, Lisa, this won't be the last time we see each other.
No, absolutely. I mean, we can talk about a lot of different things here. You've been really helpful. I mean, educated me a lot. This is not my area of expertise, so thank you for coming on. You guys, please head over to Instagram and follow her, Manteghi Law, Manteghilaw. I'm going to leave it up for a little bit. That's how I found her, by the way. She just has really great information about family law, domestic violence. It was obvious to see her passion about helping survivors and the work that she does now in the legal coaching. So if you have questions, concerns, want to talk to her, please head over there. Yes, Tanya said, please do this again. Ashley said, amazing job as always. All right, so thank you so much. I will definitely love to have you on again, and I think we could tackle a different aspect of it. But please remember that I love what you talked about, how your attorney works for you. Don't go in there all these billable hours and all you're doing is crying and you're not being able to move forward with your case. All right, so please go ahead and watch the replay. Make sure you like and share, and we're going to head over to Instagram. All right. Anything else you'd like to say before we head out? I know we didn't get to touch on a lot of questions, like she said, but we'll do our best next time.
Maybe we can do it on Instagram.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, we can answer some questions.
On Instagram.
All right. So we'll see y'all later. See ya. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.